And shaker to take the hot seat, and emerging trends and different viewpoints are then brought to the discussion table. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to invite the host of this dialogue, the CEO of DBS Group Holdings, Mr. Piyush Gupta, up on stage. Let's welcome him. Piyush, can I just ask you to look right at the back of the hall where the cameras are and say a quick hello to our online viewers.
All right. Hello, everybody on the live webcast. Welcome.
That's right. Stay with us as I hand the stage over to Piyush. Take
All
it
right.
away.
Thank you, Dan. This is the fourth time we're running the Asia Leadership Dialogue, and it's my distinct pleasure to have on stage with me today His Excellency President Aquino, the 15th President of the Philippines. President Aquino, if you'd join me on stage, please. Thank you. Thank you, sir, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have, let me pull out my few notes. We have the distinct pleasure of being joined by President Aquino, not just because he's obviously a very important leader and statesman from the region, but in my book, he is somebody who stands out for having brought about a singular transformation in the status and fate of a nation. And this is not very common, certainly in today's day and age. I did some number checking. For almost 20-25 years prior to 2010, the GDP of the Philippines, by and large, grew at about 1 percentage points lower than the average of ASEAN. From 2010 to 2016, the last 6 years that I tracked, the GDP of the Philippines has grown between 1.5 to 2 percentage points higher than the average of ASEAN. The Philippines for a long time was always regarded as the sick man of Asia. I beg your pardon for saying that, sir, but that's unfortunately the truth. In the last 6 years, it is now regarded as the darling of Asia. This kind of transformation in a single term, in a 6-year period, is actually quite unheralded. And therefore, I'm going to start, President, with the first set of questions, really related to this incredible macroeconomic transformation. Philippines jumped 38 places in the World Economic Forum competitive ranking during your tenure. So as a start, if you can talk a little bit about what are the key things you think the economy achieved over this period of time, and what drove the key elements of that change?
Perhaps just two things. One is we had a mantra which said basically good governance is good economics. And second, we believed in our people. We believed it's a singular greatest resource provided they are given the right environment. So combine both, I think that is the key to what we have achieved. Good governance translates into, whereas before a lot of money was wasted to corruption, we were able to direct the resources to really productive ventures that opened up so many opportunities for our people.
But President, that's the key question. So to me, the heart of change is good governance and eliminating corruption. Nevertheless, most of the countries are unable to get this done, and typically one leader can't make a difference because you have to change the whole structure, the government, the incentive mechanisms. How do you go about achieving that?
Well, we weren't saying that we finished all of the problems. No? There are those that are really deep-rooted in terms of corruption. But I had a fantastic team. We were focused that we had exactly 6 years to do everything that we could. And we like to think that we really utilized each and every day, including the weekends and the holidays and the Christmas break and everything, to really achieve the mission of maximizing the benefits for our people. So it was, whenever confronted with a problem, we tried to be holistic about the solution towards that problem. It was never a singular dimension in tackling a particular issue. We tried to address every particular issue just to make it more concrete. For instance, how does one join in the increasing economic opportunities if one is unskilled? Hence, there was massive investments in our tech work sector, massive infusions of funds for both the education and the basic and higher education levels, massive investments in the social services to include massive interventions in health. The budget of our health departments was increased almost threefold. Number of people in our national health reinsurance program from 51 million was the last report to me was 93 million are enrolled, and 40% of our population, the bottom two quintiles, are receiving a benefit of being able to have no charges for acquiring the health services provided by government, and doing all of that without raising any taxes. So the point that I'm trying to raise is if they dropped out of school because of ill health, then all of these interventions with regards to health. If there was no wherewithal to provide even transportation fare to the school, we have a conditional cash trans program to address that as an incentive to keep them in school. So again, any and every intervention that will help us achieve the goal of maximizing opportunities for our people was tackled. We tried to do our utmost in the 6 years that we had.
So I'm going to come back to some of those issues, but I want to just stick with the issue around governance and corruption. In fact, I have a question on my pigeonhole, which speaks to that thing as well. So how do you deal with corruption? Is corruption systemic, that it cannot be reduced to the level of Singapore? Is it corruption that prevents the full economic benefit? You think about, we talked earlier in the meeting. So Singapore till the mid-60s had as much corruption as most of the countries in the region. The thing that worked was, I think, both carrot and stick. So there was a tremendous focus on making sure that the consequences of corruption were really severe. At the same time, there was a rethinking of the incentive framework, the wage structures of bureaucrats, ministers, etc. So you need to get a balance right. Now, did you use similar tools in the Philippines? Was it just that you employed a lot of technocrats? How did you make progress? You're right, it's not been fixed entirely, but how did you make progress?
Well, number one, I kept talking to our Secretary of Justice and I said, the success of this effort does not lie in being able to charge those that we believe committed crimes against the people. That the success has to be with actually sending them to jail. Unfortunately, cases are still in litigation at this point in time. Judiciary or the wheels of justice grind kind of slow in my country. Now, that is the stick approach. So we had my predecessor charged and was incarcerated for 2 charges that she had to face. 3 senior senators of the Republic also were incarcerated while awaiting charges of misusing public funds for personal gain. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for failing to declare the entirety of his statement, in his statement of assets, liabilities, and net worth, was impeached by Congress and removed from office. Now, for the carrot approach, I think we're trying to emulate Singapore, wherein the public sector pay and benefit packages try to equal that of the private sector. We can't do that at this point in time, but there is a law, a joint resolution by Congress, that proposes to move the salary package to 70% of the private sector. We hope that is a start wherein as the economy grows, we will be able to match salaries for the government bureaucracy to that of the private sector, and therefore hopefully insulate them from the temptation of that corruption will bring if they are so inadequately compensated.
Excellent, very good. The related question, again, if I have a question on that regard as well, again, we spoke earlier. So, how do you ensure continuity in such a process across multiple administration regimes? I'm not just talking about the current one, but over the years. What can drive that? And you had some interesting observations about the demand side of that equation.
Well, before we got into office, our media was replete with stories of our countrymen leaving the country. It seemed that every Filipino's ambition was how to leave the country, and some of them added permanently. Now, there has been a reversal of that. We have seen actually a reduction of our overseas foreign workers. But at the end of the day, what ensures continuity to us is that we exposed our people to the level of service that can happen when the government is run properly. We hope that they will recognize that this is the right to demand that of anybody who succeeds after us, and who will have to face their inability to deliver at the same level or even higher levels, because they will be starting at a higher plane. So at the end of the day, consistent with our belief that our people are our greatest resource, they will ensure the continuity of the reforms that we have sought to bring to our country.
So the people will make it happen, and quite clearly today's technology and social media and civil society has a role to play in that process as well.
You don't have to wait for elections to make the people's sentiments known.
That's true. It's constant and all the time. You did one other really important thing in my mind, which is I think one of the big challenges around the region, which is a very distinct focus on education. Both the K to 12, the primary, the tertiary, and so on. Would you care to comment a little bit on your thinking on the matter of educating and skilling our populations, and particularly whether the new forms of skilling and training have to be different from what we've done in the past?
Well, definitely. One of the things that is still a work in progress is that textbooks, for instance, is always an issue within our country. There are something like 20% of the population in the basic education system at any given time, about 23 million of our countrymen. Now, producing all of the textbooks, vetting each and every textbook, the misprints, etc., is always an issue year in, year out. Move them to tablets is the matter. If there are errors that are discovered, they can be replaced right away. But why education as the singular, perhaps empowering mechanism? Well, I guess it's personal also. My father told me at the height of our martial law period, he said, today you might be famous, tomorrow you might be a nobody. Today you may be rich and tomorrow you're desperately poor. But once educated, you will have that for the rest of your life as a means to be able to face the challenges of the world. Now, in a sense, I want to afford that opportunity to each and every countryman. When we started out, we had jobs available and people who had skills that were not appropriate to the jobs that were available. So what we did was we talked to industry. What do you actually need 2 years, 4 years, 6 years from now? Then we motivated our countrymen to go into those courses that really had a distinct possibility of being employed. Now, we have that issue of generational transfer of poverty, which means that they who cannot provide for their families day in, day out, who always have the problem of fighting the next meal, now suddenly will not be able to empower their children to improve their lot in life, who will probably give them a life that is even worse than what he had. So we go back, we incentivize keeping our children in school. We geared the training that we hope that you will have a marketable skill already by the time you graduate from high school. And if you so choose to embark on a career instead of continuing higher education, then you will have that means to improve your lot in life. We also address, again, as I mentioned earlier, issues of vaccination and health regimes to be able to afford them the physical wherewithal to be able to complete the studies. Now, I think that has already started contributing to the reduction of our unemployment and underemployment figures. The unemployment figures are the lowest in close to a decade. We have had at least about 400,000 of our countrymen return home to our shores, and they have found meaningful occupations given the fact that, again, the reduction in unemployment, and given the fact that we also have something like 800,000 new entrants into the labor pool every year, plus of course trying to find jobs for those who were previously unemployed or underemployed. So all of those factors were not a negative, did not produce a negative result in that we've had that reduction, a very significant reduction in the unemployment figures. We believe where we have left off is just a starting point for a more empowered and capable citizenry who at the end of the day will have the wherewithal now to be the safeguards of democracy and to be proponents of effecting even more changes in society, since they are already free. And my father said that the very first freedom that has to be won is freedom from hunger. When you cannot be sure of where your next meal will come from. Any other freedom is irrelevant.
That's well said. So we need freedom from hunger. One of the challenges, President Aquino, for all of us is as the world is moving up the technology curve, we have to figure how we make our economies and societies also go up the value-added chain. And the concomitant challenge of that, therefore, is skilling in technology. So how do you get deeper technology skills? Philippines has benefited from a fantastic BPO industry over the last decade or so. But how do you take these BPO kids to the next level so they can be, technocrats and entrepreneurs and startup and so on? Is there a way to address that?
Well, I'd like to think that we're all students, or we never stop being students. For instance, Madam Jenny Chua visited the Philippines a few years ago at the start of my term, and she was telling us about teaching computers to the students. She said that when they visited, I think it was Finland, she was surprised that in Finland they shared computers. Whereas she was proud to say that in Singapore, we have a computer for each student. To which the Finnish host replied, we used to do that until we noticed that they were less social with each other. So now that they have one computer that they have to share, they really learn to interact and work with each other. That is what a personal fear. Somebody who does not interact with others might not be the most positive influence down the line. So we're trying to meld all of these concepts together. And also, for instance, we want to, when I was president, I instructed the Department of Science and Technology. We seem to be at the mercy and the ethical standards of people who will sell us anything. Case in point, there was a program to increase the number of landlines in the country. When there was a monopoly in telecommunications, the monopoly managed to provide at its peak about 2 million landlines to service about 50 million Filipinos. Very inadequate. So government came up with a program that was supposed to have increased the number of coverage landlines. At that point in time, cellular technology was already extant, was already being rolled out, was already being utilized. Now, when the monopoly lost its monopoly, new telcos came up, they brought in cellular telephones. There are supposed to be more cellular phones now in the Philippines than Filipinos. We're supposed to be the SMS capital of the entire world. Bottom line is, whether it's people-to-people interaction or even telemedicine, cellular technology seems to be meeting so many needs. The bottom line is DOST, our Department of Science and Technology, was ordered to promote a base of scholars whose job primarily was to study and be adept at every emerging technology that is available in the world to ensure that whatever we need is actually adequate to what is available that meets best what we want, rather than being forced to swallow whatever any salesman wanted to give us. That, by the way, that telephone program, we spent at that point in time about 5 billion pesos, and the end result was not a single phone call was transmitted to that line.
5 billion pesos is an expensive phone call. I have to agree. President, despite all of the great progress, there are a couple of areas which are still work in process, shall we say. And since you talked about monopoly, let me start first with a broader question. The Philippines has always been seen to be a very concentrated economic system, both in terms of political power, but more importantly, even in terms of economic power. There are a handful of families which have always controlled a disproportionate portion of economic drivers in the country. And over the last 6 years, this has continued to be the case. A large part of the growth still comes from the big conglomerates. If you compare that with countries like Taiwan or Germany, where the driving force of the economy tends to be SME sector, this thing, it's a different kind of situation. Is that something that bothers you as a president? How do you get a greater participation in economic growth at the lower end of society? And what would it take to change a structure which is very similar to Latin America as opposed to the rest of Asia?
Well, we were conscious of that. We didn't want to be held hostage by the various business interests and have the growth stymied. However, having said that, we sought to partner with them. Level the playing field. Those who have the necessary skills to emerge victorious in the marketplace would emerge victorious because there was no hanky-panky, there was no other outside intervention. Having said that, we have put up so many windows to have access for finances for the MSMEs. We championed that within ASEAN, within our own country, on how to actually buttress them. Most of our firms in the high 90s, I'm drawing from memory, 96, 97% actually belong to the MSME sector. So interventions like shared service facilities were introduced during our time. The direction of providing the distribution logistics chain, cold storage facilities, able to make them more, shall we say, efficient and competitive. Testing facilities also open to everybody was put up and set up. A reinvigorated Securities and Exchange Commission also. So everybody who wanted to help us grow the economy was welcome. So, but there was a very focused direction on addressing the needs of those who have the entrepreneurial ability but the lack of the material resources. When I was growing up, it has often been said to make money you had to have money to begin with. And the dream has always been, can you make money if you really have a good idea and you have very good potentials to pay, rather than you actually have it before you lend anything. And some members of my staff who went back to the private sector have actually turned out to be entrepreneurs in small businesses. One is making specialized shirts and already has 3 stores within a month after after leaving. He started it out earlier, about once.
So I'm going to ask you later, President, if you're going to become an entrepreneur as well. Maybe make shirts.
Yeah. Well, it depends on... well, the dream is that you'll make something that you'll be happy with.
But the second question, which I have a couple of things here, which are around an area which still has room for improvement, is the area of infrastructure. So the question says infrastructure in the Philippines continues to lag the region. An example, public transportation is non-existent in Manila. Do you think that more could have been done during your term in office? And the related question is, what were your frustrations in trying to solve the traffic situation in Metro Manila? In hindsight, what could you have done differently?
Very extensive. Well, just to explain it, part of the issue with the transport sector is, again, part of it, I'm not saying the entire issue is with them, but there is a particular law that says a government infrastructure project cannot be subject of a temporary restraining order. And that was practiced. But what was required was for government to put up a bond equivalent to the valuation of the property that was sought to be expropriated. The workaround to that was determining valuation. And that took on endless court sessions, so much so that there are certain projects that have been delayed a year, 2 years from implementation. The lawyers say the right of possession is not given to government, in spite of the fact that there is a law that says you cannot delay. We approached the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to make her aware of this problem. They administered justice, and they had to issue a reminder to all of the lower courts that such an issue exists. That's one. We'd like to say that we worked under a set or a body of laws that were very relevant. Unfortunately, part of our body of laws come from the martial law period, wherein there were specific laws, especially those that have to deal with the entity that was given monopoly over what we call the expressways, the superhighways. Everything that came before us that was in conflict with it, that revised it, we had to navigate all of the channels and resolve it with finality. It wasn't really just a question of our wanting to do it, but it was also addressing a lot of problems that were long-standing that had to be settled first.
So what would you say, going forward in the next thing, is there a real opportunity for Manila in particular to solve its traffic problems? Is a lot of the heavy lifting done, or is still going to be a very arduous journey?
No, in 2 years, by 2018, no, all of the things that we had set out to do will be finished. For instance, there has been delivery already of the light rail train sets, 48 sets of them, I understand, have been fully delivered. The roads that will connect the north and south major expressways, again, will be completed by 2018. The one linking the airport to an entity called Baggor City is about to be opened. What I'm trying to say is a lot of this infrastructure that we went through all of these hurdles to do so will be finished in 2 years' time, and each one of them will provide the necessary infrastructure to relieve pressure on the major thoroughfare, which is called EDSA. Now, but again, when you fly to Manila, it's a daytime population of 14 million. I'm talking the National Capital Region. And a nighttime population of 12 million. So you move 2 million people. Can we restrict the use of cars? If we have an efficient public transport system, when do we get it? Then we have to go through all of those steps to get it. Buy the equipment, have the detailed engineering and design finished, have the approval process from so many different steps, and then get Congress to sign off on the idea. But the bottom line is, we promise that we'd leave this country in a better situation than we found. I guess it's also part of it is the economy has really grown. We have a vibrant middle class that keeps on growing, who has now been enabled to buy vehicles, condominiums, and so on and so forth. And
demand is increasing, obviously.
And so much activity is happening that people are so much more active. Just to illustrate, and this is anecdotal, one of my former cabinet members has a personal driver who is now an Uber driver, who has managed to take out amortizations on 4 vehicles, and he has had to recruit his own drivers to be able to utilize all of these vehicles that he bought for the Uber service. He has actually been banned from the office of the wife of my cabinet secretary because he seems to have been pirating all of their drivers. So he is one of the budding entrepreneurs.
That's a good thing. My last question on the Philippines economy and the socio-politics were present. But you talked about a lot of these budding entrepreneurs, people who starting their own stuff, shirts, Uber services, and so on. Nevertheless, the macro data on poverty doesn't seem to have been improved very significantly over the last few years. It goes back to my oligarchy or the concentration of wealth. Now, some of it, as you suggested, is to do with the consequences of the typhoon. Some of it is to do with one-offs. Is there something which you can share with us? How do you feel about poverty alleviation in the Philippines in the last few years?
Well, when I'm asked by our own media, and they cite the figures, one thing that perhaps I should have said is, you're right, Typhoon Haiyan affected 44 of our 81 provinces. Now, people who were beyond the poverty line suddenly found themselves back below the poverty line because their assets were lost, whether it's livelihood, whether it were houses, etc. Now, the recovery is, by definition, will really take quite a long time. But having said that, that was one of the shocks that affected the poverty figures. Second is there seems to be a cartel that had successfully manipulated the price of rice, and the basket of goods is heavily favored in terms of food for the lower income sectors. So absent those 2 particular incidents, the poverty figures should have been better. Okay? Having said all of that, we recognize that poverty cannot be addressed overnight. Hence, you have, perhaps it will help, but let me just look at the figures of exactly why we expended so much on particular items in the budget. Too many papers.
Yeah, a lot of papers. But as you look through that, I'm going to throw another thing for you to think about, which is the role of the Philippines overseas workers, the diaspora, and incoming remittances as part of the process.
But just to go through it, in 2010, the budget for our health department was only at 23 billion. It is now 135 billion. in the social services budget, and a big part of this goes into the conditional cash transfer activity, from 416 billion in 2010 to 1.1 trillion for the 2016 budget. I can go on and on, but the
It's a
bottom
lot
line
more
is,
resource commitment.
yes, the idea again is CCT for 20. It's about 23 million Filipinos, 4.6 million households who are now capacitated to keep their child in school, who in time, by finishing at least the high school period, will be able to afford his family a better standard of living than that which he himself found. He is shielded from catastrophic losses if a typhoon hits by, well, better if a disease happens, when there is now a government entity that shoulders a portion of, if not the totality of your hospitalization. You don't have to squander all of those things.
There's a better social safety net, essentially.
And again, the infrastructure, which is 5% of, as an amount pegged at about 5% of GDP for this year, has already enabled the growth of the tourism sector. A lot of the tourist areas suddenly become more accessible because of the right infrastructure built by the right people at the right time. So, a lot of the things we did will not translate into next quarters or even the annual figures, but will happen down the line. But we believe this will be permanent.
So the base has been set. President, I want to switch the conversation from the Philippines' local economy to the global context. And I want to start first with the U.S. You know, the U.S. has had a very important role to play in the region. And, Mr. Mentor, Lee Kuan Yew used to say that the U.S. presence in the region assured a period of peace and harmony, which has been crucial for the growth of East Asia. And the Philippines, of course, there's a particular relationship with the U.S. because of the status through the early part of the 20th century. What is your sense about the U.S. engagement in the region? You think President Obama's pivot to Asia actually happened and adequately? And linked to that, do you see concerns, whether it's Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, the Democrats, Republicans, is there likely to have a bearing on how the U.S. thinks about Asia? Or do you think in any case people are going to start putting up barriers so the engagement can be lower?
Let me start with the first question. Is there engagement enough? To us, actions speak louder than words, and the freedom of navigation, whether it was a flight or a sailing of a particular vessel, stressed the point